Hello, good afternoon. Welcome. It's Thursday, it's 5 o'clock. We are live once again for another Law Firm Marketing. Today we'll be discussing international marketing in law firms. Sorry, I'm completely flustered because the conversation originally took a completely different turn in the pre-show. You might see some guilty faces. Anyway, we're going to get started today, and we have this week very special guest, Sarah Croot, and we're going to do the introductions very shortly. But of course, as always, if you have any questions, please just leave them in the comments, and we'll be happy to at least do our best to answer those. But without any further ado, let's do the round of introductions. And first of all, I'd like to start with Sarah, our special guest this week. So, Sarah, please. Let's hear a little something about yourself.
I'll try and steer off the topic of conversation we had prior to going live. But so I'm Sarah Croot. I've been in business development for professional services, law firms and accounting for, I feel like I want to say under 20 years, but it's probably now over. For my sins, having worked for 3 different law firms, PwC, and then most recently Grant Thornton, and I actually worked in the international business there, in their global business. Was there for 6.5 years, and predominantly looking after how you can help to create opportunities for organizations cross-border to be able to identify, pursue and win cross-border opportunities. So it's fascinating, and it was a really wonderful way to be able to see and capture knowledge and different ways of working from across different cultures that then could be translated across the network. So really fascinating and also to be able to see the difference between what maybe was happening in the Americas versus Asia Pacific and how we could translate some of those learnings. So it was fantastic, really great.
Thank you very much. That sounds great. This is going to be a very interesting week, I think. And next for the introductions, let's go to Simon. Simon, how are you this week? Let's hear a little introduction from yourself there.
Hi, I'm Simon Marshall, law firm marketing. That's it. 6 law firms, 1 agency. You know me by now.
Short and simple, just like me. Thank you for that. Actually, I'm not that short. And let's go over to wherever somebody is sitting in the sun, probably with a margarita sitting next to her. Lottie, Charlotte, how are you this week?
Very well. No margaritas, but beautiful Portuguese wine. So that's definitely a highly recommend when travel opens. And yeah, I look after marketing for various businesses in the legal sector, predominantly legal technology or education, and sort of just support all these businesses, helping law firms wherever they need me.
Thank you very much for that. And last but by no means least, Cass. Hello, Cass. How are you this week?
Hello. I'm broadcasting from sunny Manchester. It's glorious here. I do law firm research, and I used to work with Sarah, I have to confess, at BLP and at Cameron McKenna as well. So at that time supporting BD and their pitches and sector researchers and all that kind of stuff. And now I have set up Flair Insight and we do law firm research. That's me in a nutshell.
That's a fabulous nutshell. Thank you very much for that, Cass. And well, there is me as well. I'm David SAYCE, digital marketing consultant with Paper Gecko. I help professional services firms, B2B firms with their digital needs. So yes, as I say, today we're talking about international marketing for law firms. We have a special guest. We're going to be talking about areas around tone of voice as well, about the cultural side of international marketing. And I think, Kat, you've got a few questions to get us started with Sarah here.
Yeah, I mean, when I was thinking about different networks, I was thinking from the law firm perspective that a lot of law firms are guilty of having an international network just because they have clients who may need international needs. And I just wanted to get your take on how they can progress that and make it much more of a BD opportunity rather than a nice to have.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And actually, having come from a network that is actually a single brand, even those organizations don't often make the most of the opportunity that's there. I think the key to it all is thinking about the why, what, how, and that market focus piece at the front end. If you've got an international network, you already have a warm target, a warm base of clients in various jurisdictions that you could be targeting, whether that's through a service line strategy or an industry strategy. And I think the thing that we often miss the trick is trying to bring together, if you're in France, Ireland, UK, and you're all targeting financial services, it would be much stronger to be able to do that as one and be able to think about how you leverage the relationships you've got in one market into another, and be able to cross-sell together. But I think that the challenge is always about, I find, is about how you get the what's in it for me right. So why would a partner in Ireland help someone in another firm in the UK when they're going to get no upside? And so the challenge I came up against time and time is that how do you get that what's in it for me? Which is difficult the way that professional services is remunerated. But I think there's, I come back always to the client need and how we should be thinking much more client focused in the way we operate. And the more that we can get into that client space and therefore be able to see the stickiness that comes from having those relationships cross border, the better we'll be. So we tend to be quite short-term focus in activity. And so it's trying to get them focused on that long-term piece. So trying to think about that market focus, what can we get out of it, and trying to get it down to the numbers. What's the commercial outcome we can drive from it?
Did you ever have any case studies of clients that have benefited from the network and then been able to present those back to partners, or is that kind of gold dust that you were never able to get? So,
no, there's plenty of examples of that, and I think both at a client level and an industry level. I think the way that clients are buying now, they expect much more than just technical expertise. They expect you to have invested where they need you to be. And that it's going to be a seamless service wherever they are in the world. And so how can they achieve that? And so we, in all of the firms I've worked in, there's been examples of clients where we've grown with the client or looked for opportunities, how we work with partners in particular jurisdictions if we don't have them in the network. In Grant Thornton, for sure, we had clients where, particularly on some of the tax and due diligence type of opportunities, we'd have clients who were serving in 37 countries, which were then incredibly sticky because it makes it much harder for those clients to leave the network. And we can then leverage what we've learned from that client base to be able to take to another. So there's lots of examples of it, but it's not easy. And I think it's that, how do you make it feel easy to fee earners to be able to make it happen?
Yeah, I've been thinking about law firms and how when you look at their network pages, there are very few case studies that are to do with clients and how firms across the network have serviced them. So it tends to be, we have this network and that's it.
I don't know Can I ask a question about that? And I wonder whether there's a reason for that, which is, in my experience with firms, especially those firms that don't really have a genuine footprint, but are trying to create one or create the illusion of one, they treat it as if it's its own play. They treat international as if it's the play, rather than, as Sarah correctly said, it's like, isn't it service or sector, or issue? Isn't that the play? And geography kind of threads through it like a golden thread. Do you see what I mean? Like if your need is cross-border in the service, then guess what? You're going to take a firm or a combination of firms that have got cross. But playing just international in and of itself, has anyone ever bought a law firm for having two offices for anything other than a need that they had? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that's always the first thing it comes down to for me is the market focus. What are we doing, and why are we doing it? What's the pursuit? I've had conversations with senior leadership before about how do we develop an international strategy? Is there a template for it? I'm like, well, there probably is one you can download off the internet. However, my first question would be, what are you pursuing? What are your clients asking for? And why are they therefore going to be investing in growth into a service line, an industry, or a particular geography? And it might be a region because you see For when I was working at BLP, it was a lot about, when we're looking at real estate as a sector, targeting the sovereign wealth funds and predominantly the money coming from Asia Pacific and Middle East into London. So therefore you can think about what that international strategy looks like. But quite often it's as you say, Simon, it's we need an international strategy. Let's make one up. And we'll target some nearby countries or ones that we think could be good. And then we go from there, and it's sort of very weak. And so that question about how you get the market focus correct based on the client focus that you have and what your clients are saying they need or want is really important.
Has it become more issue focused over the last year or two? Because we've talked in Law Firm Marketing Show and Tell about everyone's promoting ESG and sustainability or digitalization and all that kind of stuff. So is it becoming more issue based than sector, or is it a kind of combination of the two?
I think it's both. I mean, take COVID as a great example. I've never seen so many professional services just fire up so fast on the back of an issue. I mean, Jesus, there were seminars, webinars coming out of your ears on every topic in every region to do with COVID and issues to do with COVID and the pandemic. So issues, I think, are always going to be important, and you have to be on the front foot with that. But there is an expectation. I know when I've spoken to, I remember speaking to the CEO at AIG, and he said to me that, it's a given for him around technical expertise, but for him, it's incredibly important that his advisors understand the insurance business and the insurance market. So whilst issues you need to be fast paced and on the ball and be really agile with, you still need to have that strong thread around understanding and talking the client's language within an industry too.
Okay. Did when new firms were recruited into GT, did you get kind of client service standards put together, or is it kind of a given that they've got that technical expertise?
I think in any network that a firm joins, whether it's law firm or accounting, there will always be minimum quality standards that have to be met, and a huge amount of due diligence happens around that. I think it's hard when it comes to, so I'll go back to my example at Grant Thornton. We did have metrics around the client experience. There was a clear Grant Thornton client experience. And I think that's really important. And we talk about it a lot more these days. And I think it's going to become ever more present, because it's not necessarily the what we do, it's the how that makes us different, because law firms, accounting, they're all delivering a service and there's an expectation of technical excellence, but it's how you do it. It's the personality of the brand. It's the way that the people operate. So having that consistent client experience, especially across borders, is really important. How you indoctrinate or engage a new firm into that is quite challenging. And I think that's part of the due diligence process, is to make sure that the cultural fit of whatever firm is coming in matches the network. Because if it doesn't, it's going to jar and it'll never work. I mean, looking at success on any type of M&A or integration, cultural fit is number one. And so being clear on what is the Grant Thornton client experience, it needs to be part of that process. How you get to the making that happen takes a little time. But I think it comes down again to, once you get the clients in common and having to start working on the job, that it starts to really manifest.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen sorry, Simon. You go, Sai, it's right.
Those firms that were joining the network that you kind of brought into the kind of mothership, did you ever pick up anything and think that's quite an interesting innovation? Or
oh yeah, always. I think that there's new firms come in, and often they've come from either Big Four or another network. So you'll learn something, and you're always hearing about what's happening in other networks or other firms. I think the interesting thing always for me was looking at what you can learn from maybe perhaps some smaller firms on the way they do things. I mean, there was the firm in Greece is always touted as one of the shining examples of how to do things very differently in an innovative way. And one of the things they did was set up almost a shadow strategy committee of senior managers. And I think that's a lovely way to be able to start to engage your people within the wider organization in what's the future of our business. But it was something then we could take and use and leverage elsewhere. And, the firm in Argentina, very giving, and they were going out into South America to train other firms on transfer pricing, because to them, they saw it was a client need. Other firms in South America didn't have it. So they invested their time and money in building up their expertise. And so I think, whether it's a new firm or an existing firm, there's always, I think, something to learn. And I very much found it was often the smaller firms where you'd find the really interesting different ways, because they have different, they don't have the resources of the US and the UK. So they're having to be a little bit more entrepreneurial, a little bit more agile. And how can you take that and use it to create something for either a region or one of the bigger firms? I just find it fascinating, and definitely one of the best things about being in a global role for me was being able to look at that and take lessons from cultures and different countries, regions to spread across the world.
Did you used to have a kind of an annual get together that was every single firm, or was it, how did you orchestrate it in terms of sharing best practice? Was it up to you?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the age-old challenge, really. I mean, one of the groups that I used to work with, which were the International Business Centre directors, we had people from San Francisco to Sydney, and trying to get a call where everyone is on it, someone's always in their pajamas. So it's very difficult. So that, and I during the last 18 months, it's been really difficult, because whilst we all have learned to be much more effective and use technology much more in a much more effective and efficient way, to me, there's something that just cannot replace face-to-face engagement. And particularly when it comes to that sort of global or international space, where I can't get someone from San Francisco and Sydney and the whole of Europe in between on a call, because it's 4 a.m. and it's that's difficult. And actually what you want to be doing is helping those people to engage and have conversation and share. So there were lots of different mechanisms for getting together, because it was, there's 55,000 people in Grant Thornton. So by service line, by industry, by region, there is a global conference, lots of those type of touch points. But with that number of people, when you are, communication is key. I mean, I can see Simon smiling, and it's a bit like, how do you get that? How do you get those messages? How do you extract it from that number of people and be able to share it in a way that doesn't automatically get deleted on we all get those newsletters that we go, oh, it's here again, delete. And there's a nugget in there somewhere, but the way that you tend to, I think, pick them up is when you're at the water cooler moments, or having a coffee at a conference, or in the bar for a gin and tonic. That's, I think, when you pick them up. Unfortunately, that's not happening at the moment.
What happens in terms of language? Is it just expected that English is the language that everybody should know, or would content be disseminated in different languages?
Predominantly, yes, in English, but I think there are some key languages like Spanish, French. Everything tends to get translated into Spanish, French, Mandarin, Russian, and all of the sort of general conferences are done in English. But I think that's one of the things that you end up being very conscious of, which I'm now going back to, is you have to speak slower and be very clear on your messages. And actually, when you're doing things like, if you're presenting, I used to fly all over the place going and presenting at conferences. And the key to get your message, that keep it simple, stupid, is so, apparent. And the use of very minimalist slides to be able to get your point across. So if someone is a non-native English speaker, particularly in places like South America and China and Japan, where we used to struggle quite a lot about non-native English speakers. But you want to keep them as part of the conversation. You want to engage people. So being very clear and keeping things to short, punchy messages was incredibly important. But it is also important, like I know that in South America, they run their regional conferences quite a lot in Spanish. because it's, you know, that there are some challenges around having English speakers, but you just have to flex with it.
I think we can all learn from the simple take.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Easy to say, not always easy to do. It's, what do they say? It's sorry, it's a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one. And you know, sometimes you go off on a I'm surprised to hear I go off on a tangent at the start. I get very overexcited, and I speed up, and then I say too many words. So it's that, you know, trying to keep it down.
Cool. Does anyone else have a question?
Do you see an increased use of graphics and visuals then as a result of that? If you're trying to
Yeah.
simplify language and stuff.
Yeah, and I think those, whatever ways you can engage people. So when having phone, you know, the apps where you can engage around answering questions or word clouds and all that sort of stuff, video footage. I think it's all really helpful. And I think that, you know, coming back to the different media that you can use is really important. And actually things like on Teams, I think they started doing this auto captioning and translation, which is, again, they're getting better at, you know, Microsoft and those people are investing in technology. I think that will only continue to improve and make it easier for us to be international in the way we operate. But yeah, for sure, definitely looking at more interesting, engaging content.
Cool. An Italian law firm partner said to me a few years ago that he felt that the reason that the Brits had done so well internationally as law firms was that they could work together really well in teams, like, and the New York lawyers and British lawyers had kind of conquered the world, as it were, with their legal. If you think about it, most contracts are drafted in one of those two kind of legal systems traditionally. And I just wonder if you had any thoughts on that, or whether you've seen other kind of cultural traits or things that people do better than that. His idea was that put two Italian partners in the room on the same side, they'd end up fighting each other more than they would the Italian or the English lawyers on the other side. That was his phrase, not mine, right? It's his idea of this. But have you seen any cultural kind of elements like that, things that you'd say that are worthy of kind of note?
I mean, there is something in every culture, I think, around the world about being culturally sensitive. And we did a lot. I mean, I ran cultural awareness training for a number of the groups that I worked with, just because, you know, it's really interesting when you can see, for example, one of my best friends is Swedish. She is incredibly direct, and to her credit, and she thinks that British people are just ridiculously waffly and don't get to the point, and it's all just too nice. And then you go to Denmark when they're even more direct, and to Japan where you'll find people just saying yes and they don't mean yes, they mean no. And so, you know, in every culture you deal with, there'll be something that you need to take on board. And I think trying to at least be aware when you're dealing with a different country or culture, that don't expect that what you anticipate as the response is the response you'll get, or that type of thing. I don't know if I'm articulating it well enough, but I think you find, even if you're dealing with the US, right, you'll find between the UK and the US, you'll get some miscommunication because they'll be expecting one way of working and you're expecting another. France, not very far away, I was working on a project with the French CEO, and he was forever saying, this is because you are English and you do not understand about action. And, you know, it was just, for him, it was all like, let's just do this. We don't need to hang about and get engagement and all the rest of it. Let's just do this. And he couldn't understand. So, yeah, it's fascinating, and I learn all the time.
What's your go-to then, in terms of that cultural sensitivity? So you go into Japan, you know it's going to be very different. What do you do in a practical term? What tip have you got for a lawyer who's sent off on a business trip?
I think first off is make sure you've read. So I would always contact one of my connections in that country. If you don't have one, then there's always something you can read on it to see what are the cultural key points for going into that jurisdiction. I mean, like Japan, for example, it's very, very different there, and the tradition is very strong, and being talking to the right people first. That hierarchy is very important. And it's so being aware that you are going into a different culture for a start, not just I'm turning up, they'll be rolling out the red carpet, I can say what I like. So doing your due diligence for a start, using the connections you've got. If you know someone in that country, contact them first. They'll give you some pointers. And quite often, like I used to use my connections to get me an intro to relevant people to help open the door, for example, because you can't just fly over and turn up and hope people are going to let you in the door. So how are you getting that introduction, and what can you do to set the scene correctly? There isn't really a shortcut, I don't think, but I think it's about listening as well, and being aware of verbal and non-verbal cues when you get somewhere. I remember one of my first meetings, I was in the Middle East. I was at the Middle East regional meeting, and I was shaking everyone's hand, and the guy from Kuwait put his hand almost behind his back, and because for him it wasn't culturally acceptable to be shaking hands with a woman. So it was that. So you just need to be, and that's fine. You just, you have to accept the situation you're in, not make a big fuss about it, and just be very open to the fact you're in a different culture.
What do you think? Because obviously every piece of communication, every piece of interaction is a part of marketing, essentially, or it's a representation of the firm. Because you have to adapt to different cultures and essentially act differently, how do you think that relates back to essentially the brand personality and what the company wants to be seen as? I don't know if my question makes sense. So, certain cultures will expect you to be a bit more close and chatty and, talk to them about those sorts of things, whereas other cultures are very resistant to that. So how do you think that kind of plays out?
I mean, my view is it's a bit like there's no one size fits all generally when it comes to clients. I think the same is with markets. So I would tend to think about things to the audience you're talking to and the principles that need to underpin that. So whatever your brand is and whatever your brand personality is, there will be some traits that underpin that. And as long as when you're doing your communication, you're true to that brand, but reflective of the audience you're talking to, I think that's much better than taking, this is the boilerplate that must be used everywhere and when talking about corporate, for example, because as you say, it's not going to translate in particular countries. But it's also thinking, I mean, the other way of working, it depends on the brand that you're working in, is to think about, there is a global message, there is a regional, or this is our international perspective. And then there's this is our Peruvian view. It's doing something that is tailored to a particular market. I mean, one of the things I always wanted to get to and never quite managed to find someone to do this is real proper account-based marketing, where you take, because we have some, there is so much content that exists. I mean, I know it's just in Grant Thornton in financial services, I never needed to produce global content because there was so much of it in Greece, in Ireland, in UK, in the US. You don't need to create it, but what you need to do is make it relevant to Wells Fargo or, HSBC. And I think that's the thing for me, is always coming back to what's the voice of the client? What does the client need to hear from you? What voice does that client need to hear from you? And how do you tailor to them? Which is much more labor intensive, but I think is much more, it's going to produce much more.
It's interesting. I mean, you mentioned it being labor intensive there. I mean, last week we were talking about, I think it was last week, return on investment. And I think, taking that time ahead of time, it really does pay off, especially in instances like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's what I found, again, working with partners and partnerships, they tend to be very short-termist and go for the easy wins first. And so having to take something and work on it and tailor it goes to the, that's too difficult. Can someone in marketing do that? Well, not always, because actually they don't know the client. They can do as much as they can do, but you have to own that client relationship. You have to hold the pen. And I think that's that level of accountability and responsibility really needs to shine through when it comes to that type of stuff, when you're looking at return on investment. And I think there is a lot of pass it over to someone else to do, but actually that is the partner or the fee earner that needs to be able to put in the hard graft to make it happen. You get a much better return on investment.
Did you have a formal client feedback program for your big clients across the network, or was it more the lead partner wherever they were based and getting that feedback through them?
So I've done, in all of the firms I've worked in, I've been involved in client feedback in different guises, whether it's independent senior partner reviews and so long, big relationship conversations at senior level, and online type questionnaires with metrics in there. And I think we looking at that international, how do you take HSBC and take a global view on that relationship? It's quite difficult because the relationships are so vast. If you look at how many countries you're serving in, what's the answer you really want to see? I mean, for me, it would be a number one thing to be able to do, because quite often those clients look to you to find out how you are serving them internationally, because they don't know. But it's really not easy, because every firm, certainly even within Grant Thornton, which is one brand, there are different. There's no single infrastructure, and everyone's on different products. So trying to create anything cohesive is very challenging. I don't think it's impossible, but I do think it's about what's the outcome you're trying to drive from it, and therefore you'll be able to find a solution to do it. But ultimately we have to get there. I think when I look at firms that are very much focused from the client perspective and focus number one on the client as opposed to by service line, for example, that level of rich data you get from those client relationships and the stickiness you have with them and the profitability, therefore, of those relationships is far higher. So trying to find the solution is absolutely something we should be doing.
Oh, somebody was going to go. Is that you, Si?
Someone was breathing.
Breathing deeply. Yeah, I mean, I've worked with a few firms and presented a client strategy back to them, because a lot of different partners don't actually know what their clients are doing. And then said that, for example, HSBC are growing in Africa and that firm has a preferred firms network, but the partners have disregarded it. They've just kind of gone, well, no, we don't have an office there. So it feels like for law firms, there's quite a lot of lessons to be learned in terms of working together and not disregarding your network as a BD opportunity.
I think that's right. I think it's not just law firms. I think it's any network, because but it comes down to that foundational thing, which for me is trust. So wherever you are in the world, as a partner, if you have a relationship that is important, you have to trust that whoever you introduce into that client relationship is going to treat them the way that you expect them to be treated. So if they're your key client, they want, and you're going into, I don't know why Peru keeps coming to mind, Peru, they have to also treat your client as a key client. And that only comes from having a trusted relationship with that firm and having a level of confidence in the quality standards that are within the network. So there's a number of things, but I know that there are firms in my previous, in Grant Thornton, where the fear of cross-selling in to another firm is because of that level of trust isn't there. So there's for me a bit around transparency of the network, transparency around quality, adherence to quality, what happens if you don't, consequences of none, where, as we were talking about earlier, case studies of what works really well, and actually the client feedback that says you've been great in Peru, and that level of individual trust that can build out into, okay, I now can refer any client over there. But it is a fundamental thing, and it's very much around also considering global mindset, which is not a simple thing. It really isn't a simple thing to create. Even in my role I had at Grant Thornton, it was very challenging to see that global mindset across an entire firm and across the network. You know, it's something that's still hard to manifest, just because of the way that firms are structured.
Do you have a kind of comms plan for cascading the international opportunities that were, in terms of, would partners go on LinkedIn and talk about Grant Thornton International and deals that they'd done with other firms, or was it very much around internal strategy?
A combination, and you know, it's very it's not a simple answer, because it's, you know, a network of 140 independent firms that are under one brand. It's not, you can't make people do one thing. So there is a level of communication around internal strategy and what's happening, and then external as well, which tended to be more around a service line or around an industry. But I think for me, always communication can be improved. And in any firm I've been in, it's always been a challenge. Because you have so much, you know, we were talking about it earlier, you get so much information coming at you all the time, and it's very difficult to sift through to see what's important. So when you're trying to push your message out, you're in a load of noise. So imagine that by 140 firms plus global, all wanting to talk about their thing. It's very difficult to get it right. And I think that's about, come back to my earlier point around your market focus, who you're trying to talk to and why. And that applies internally as well as externally.
Have you found, because obviously, especially the UK is very interesting for the cultural mix that it has when it comes to people, and, you know, inevitably in your law firm, we will have people from all walks of life, especially if you look at marketing departments, etc. Have you found that to be a beneficial thing, or is it more challenging when someone from a different culture comes into a UK market, for example, or is it something that is actually helpful because they can bring sort of a new perspective into the conversation? Or
I 100% think you need cultural diversity in groups. I mean, we talk about diversity or inclusion all the time, and yes, it's very focused on gender, but for me, cultural diversity is so important, particularly when you're talking about international markets, because if you're a British person who is looking at an international strategy, but you've never lived anywhere else, you've always been here, it's very hard to then think about, well, how's that going to land in XYZ? It's not impossible, obviously, because, you know, I've never lived anywhere else other than the UK, but I have been immersed into so many different cultures, it's helped. But working with cross-cultural teams, I think, is really important, just for that innovation of thought, a different way of thinking, ideas that are generated. And actually, I was out for dinner with a friend of mine last night, and she was just talking about the fact that she had to go out for dinner with someone who couldn't really see what they were eating. So she had to explain all the tastes and the sensations and so when you're challenged around something from someone in a different culture who doesn't understand why or what the outcome is, or you really have to think about your answer. And I think that's really beneficial, because we will always assume, well, that's the way you do it because I've always done that. But actually, someone asking me the question of why, or why didn't we do it like this, is very helpful. And I think that comes quite often from cultural diversity in a team.
I have one more question relating to this, and it kind of goes to everyone, because I think everyone had international experience in different capacities. But have you guys found like a really good strategy in terms of educating a team around different cultures? So is there, Sarah, you mentioned like a global mindset earlier, I think, and And I wonder if there is any way that we can train people on becoming or starting to own a global mindset. Last week, we also spoke briefly about how, marketing is essentially the job of more people, and, there should be internal education and passing on information. So is there any best practice to do that?
I think we might have experienced a technical glitch there. Oh no,
Hey.
Sarah is back.
Should we put the pressure on ourselves
you're
and
on
answer it
mute.
before Sarah?
It was Amazon delivery. See, the benefit of working from home is, obviously you can be at home all the time, but the bad side is tend to order a lot of stuff and it turns up in the middle of a call. Sorry.
It's from Amazon France, by the way.
Hey?
It's from Amazon France as well.
We were talking about lessons around global mindset and how we can embed that.
Or if there is like a way that we can sort of train people, or what exercises can we do? Because it isn't an easy thing, as you said, to grow into the shoes of having that mindset. So what can a marketing department or BD department do so that everyone in the firm starts to live and breathe that?
I think that's a really good question. And I think there's like most things with marketing BD, there's no magic bullet with it. I think it has to start with the learning and development team and how you induct people into an organization, the behaviors that you are endorsing and supporting, because ultimately it's a behavioral change program. It's the same as if you implement an industry strategy, for example. You can't just put an industry group in and say, we're now industry focused. It's actually very much a behavioral change program, and how you reward, recognize and encourage those right behaviors is fundamental to that. So I'm not sure how, I don't have like a magic bullet for it, but it is definitely how you start to make people think differently about the opportunity. And my experience was going out, talking to people, seeing what I could learn from having a different perspective. But not everyone has that opportunity. However, if you link it to things like promotions, one of the things I was looking at was how international secondments, how you make that part of the partnership track. So you can't, if you want to be on partnership track, you must have done an international secondment, because it helps you have that broader mindset, create a broader network, that type of thing. And I think the way law firms, accounting firms, any professional services organization looks to drive those behaviors often comes back to reward and recognition. I don't know whether other people have got other perspectives on that.
The one firm I've seen recently that's done a pretty good job of it, I think, is Denton's. There's a strong sense, certainly when I've dealt with the Denton's guys, of there's this kind of culture to the firm, and I didn't realise it just seems to be relatively consistent. A bit like you'd expect from any kind of global firm, but they have this amazing tolerance for making things work locally and thinking globally. And I think that that's an easy and trite phrase to use, but they I know that I've used the example of this Scottish video campaign that they did a couple of calls ago, but I've seen some other stuff since over the last few days, and they're very good at celebrating those things that are happening locally. I think strangely, when I was at Dewey, we were pretty good. It's a different approach because it was an American-led approach, but actually they were pretty culturally sensitive and clever and brought the best of kind of American culture meets the local culture. Right? You went to the Moscow office, they were very much ingratiated into the culture and the history and everything that was going on. They were, they're Americans who'd gone nap, as it were, entirely. And I think there's got to be something like what Sarah's saying in there, and maybe that's the comments, maybe even more, that just you've got to have that tolerance of it being how can I put it, a bit more malleable at the edges. If you're in the mothership, right, guess what, you're going to be, and you're sat in the middle of EY, you're going to have that kind of culture to you. But if you're out there in Lima, in Peru, then guess what, you're going to have a slightly different and localized kind of approach to it as well. And I think it's the balance of those things, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really important thing to capture. And not everything is global, and you do need to celebrate local because you have to be relevant to your market. I don't think you can ever get away from that, and I don't think you should. It's really interesting what you said about being in the middle of EY. It's if you are quite often I've seen organisations I've worked in end up being very London or New York or those big hub centric, and if you're not in those, you feel very much out in the sticks. So even if you've got 23 offices in the UK, for example, you do need to also make sure you're engaging beyond the big territories, and making people engagement, it's critical for me.
I know with a few of the firms I've worked with, although they've had the big London office, they've been very careful not to refer to that as even the HQ internally, trying to alleviate that with a UK centric base company. And that was very interesting, especially as the business expanded through to other areas as well. Sorry, I'm having some noise issues here.
I just wanted to check what it was.
It relates to a 5-year-old.
It does relate to a 5-year-old, yes.
One of the other things that came up in the conversations before today is channels for communication. So when I was back in Australia, I found that certain channels just work better, and also people trust different channels to different extents. So for example, for me, it was shocking how much trust people put into something like Facebook, which I personally wouldn't find a trustworthy source of information. And I just found it like a really interesting piece to bring into the conversation. And I don't know if anyone had experience, or Sarah, when you worked on these global strategies or looked at the specific regions, whether you found that certain channels had a bigger emphasis than others.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's particular cultures that are very hot on social media, for example, and those that aren't, those that have got really active Twitter feeds and all that type of stuff, and those that don't. For me, it was like things like WhatsApp. I had WhatsApp groups with, so many groups, but didn't work in certain regions. And it was quite funny, but I think you're right that, taking the breadth of channels that you've got available to you and seeing how you best use them in particular markets. But I think Simon's the comms expert.
It just reminds me of this story that my first ever girlfriend's dad was an IBMer, and he said that he had a colleague who could speak like 5 different languages, and when he went to read something to his daughter, each time he'd have to think, does she speak the language that this letter is written in, right? And I think that's the same metaphor for the channels that you're talking about, isn't it? Because if you're dealing with an Aussie and you say, I'm not going to use Facebook, that seems countercultural and it's the wrong thing to do. And actually, you need to do that way. And Sarah's right that, in WhatsApp, you're not going to get to a Japanese leader by writing in WhatsApp. They're not going to, they might have a phone. Never mind have WhatsApp. I don't know the cultural sensitivities, but you know what it's like. Like if you don't go through appropriate channels, and I haven't found a channel that works yet for everyone except face to face. I think it's the only one that, and I think that's why people do fall back on it. When we were in expansion mode at OC, I learned probably most about our culture by going to the German offices, which is the most established long-term partner, and then finding out how they did things and looked at them for 2 days. We were ostensibly there to tell them about what we were doing with the brand project. We learned more about our brand by standing in the office going, all of these offices and all their meeting rooms are named after British football clubs. That's kind of cool, right? They have town halls for everything. I mean, they'll have a town hall to talk about when they're going to have a town hall, right? And it's like, they were just that size of firm, still 70 or 80 people, but it was just lovely to see all that. They hadn't lost sight of some of those things that, whereas a UK, maybe a Bristol or London dominated firm had lost sight of a little bit, that sense of need for culture. They would eat together every other day. The whole firm. Crazy.
That's lovely.
Yeah, well, there's lots of good food as well. So, like a bratwurst anyway. You must have eaten well, Sarah, when you traveled the world.
Sorry?
You must have eaten and, had the odd drink around the world as well.
Well, just, the odd one.
I did say one of my questions would be, where's the best bar that you've been to? So.
Oh,
Which see, I think there is a LinkedIn answer for Sarah, and there's the Facebook friends answer as well. So.
The one that immediately came to mind was standing on, oh my God, I think it's called the Red Bar on the Bund in Shanghai, sometime in the evening. And it was just phenomenal. Just that view was just amazing. But yeah, phenomenal. There are, let's go back to this. Let's have a conversation afterwards.
Yeah.
I disappear for a few minutes. It's all changed to food and drink. That's great.
I think my last question was around the thing about GT that I like is obviously it's a load of different network firms that are different legal entities, but they have GT as their brand. A lot of law firms have a kind of best friends network that has a name, but is there anything that they can learn from GT? Do you think it's best to have one brand that everybody's under, or can you still be successful if you have a kind of a looser network?
Oh, 100%. I don't think there's any one, again, there's no one size that fits all. I think there's an element of some things are easier when you've got one brand, because at least everyone's purple in every country, and it makes some things easier to be able to work together because you've got some sense of we are working together, we have something that binds us. But I think there is also something around a network based on principles that isn't a consistent brand that adds a bit more agility to being able to be responsive to client need. And, with Grant Thornton, it was one firm, it's broadly one territory, one firm. But actually, I think some of the other networks will have more than one firm because that breeds a bit more opportunity to be very client specific in the way you put together client teams. So I do think there is scope for both. But I think the thing comes down to the success will be how much you are listening to what your clients want and being flexible and fast to respond. Because the more I see about the changing requirements of clients and their demands, and they are expecting much, much more than I think we have in the past thought is enough. We are fantastic at doing M&A, hire us. That's not enough anymore. We have to be much faster at responding to their needs, using technology to be able to make things more, cost effective and faster, and leverage, innovations that are coming to market. How do we use blockchain? Those types of things. And so the networks that use that the best are fastest to respond, I think, are the ones that are going to succeed, whether they are one brand or multiple.
I've seen a bit of a challenge the other way around over the last few months as well, where some of the banks want you to have a kind of UK-wide approach to things, right? So you've got to have a Scottish element, you've got to have England and Wales, you've got to have a Northern Irish element, right? So you've got to have those 3 jurisdictions. If it's in planning law, that's 4 jurisdictions, but different story. And interesting that they insist on you having that kind of play, as it were. But as a result of it, they don't always get the best result.
Yeah.
Because then they're stuck with, those people who are really strong in, one of those jurisdictions aren't necessarily the ones who are stuck in the others.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting watching those plays. And I think there's, to Kat's point, I think there's still opportunity there for people to dwell on it and go, yeah, but we're better than those guys here, right? So whatever your RFP says, why don't you choose us for that bit? Carve out that bit, and we'll do that better than everyone else. Do you know what I mean? Or we that part of that best friends network is not as good as we are. Therefore, treat us as the best friend. We'll play nicely and whatever, And I think there's still opportunities for firms to position themselves that way.
I think that's absolutely an opportunity that should be explored. But from a client perspective, they want simple. So if it's a subcontractor too, it's easier for them. They want, as a general rule, they don't care what service line you sit in, what practice area you're in, what color you are. They just want their problem solved the best.
Yeah, I guess I was hinting at the idea though that it's simple for the procurement person. It's simple for the person who's in the GC role to choose that. But actually the end user, the banker who's got to do, let's say, remortgaging through a Scottish office, an English office, and a Northern Irish office, doesn't have that experience, they go, this is a headache because I've got
Yeah.
firms that aren't as strong because they're part of the same firm. Whereas instead, when I could instruct them myself before, you know, it was much easier and I got better higher quality for the same price. So I just think there's a natural tension there that firms can still play with.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to play devil's advocate about the nature of networks for a minute and just see that there are
Yeah.
chances for the indies to do something still as well.
100%.
David, have you still got a 5-year-old at your knees here? Are we still are you fighting off on iPad time?
There's been a few tantrums today, which is why I've been on mute. Some of those tantrums are actually the 5-year-old. She's disappeared in a huff because I told her to go downstairs. I'm a very bad father. What can I say? But she was. Well, anyway, she had her iPad and she's showing raspberries, and I don't even know what the show she was watching was. But,
There you go. This is a different cultural difference. That's,
It
that's
is.
you know, one that relates to.
Generational, you know, what are the expectations? Have we met them? Yeah, it's important stuff for David. He's learning all the time.
It's one of the things I think Sarah was very interesting there, talking about how and Charlotte mentioned as well the cultural mix often, especially I've seen within marketing departments. And I've got to say, over the many years I've been involved in marketing, I think often the best teams are those with just a really interesting mix. And as you say, I think it can drive some innovation, some ideas, some different ways of thinking. And I found that to be absolutely fascinating over time.
I think that for me, the key thing always is go back to trust. I mean, the team I worked with in my last role in GT was fabulous. And we worked so well together because we all had trust in each other. And, my leadership style is to say, challenge me or tell me when you think there's something else we could be doing, come up with ideas. That's great. I think environments which invite healthy challenge and engagement and no one's got the right answer are the best ones. And that comes down to having trusted relationships. And I think that for me is the key with any sort of type of success, whether it's a team, a cross-border network, a client pursuit. You have to work on a relationship to build that level of trust, which will ultimately help you succeed.
I think it's a virtuous circle, isn't it? Because that's where great talent goes.
Yeah.
You provide that kind of environment, and great talent thinks, well, I want to work in a multicultural environment like that where I'm going to be tested and pulled along, and when I'm 27, 28-year-old doing the work that I would be doing at 40 somewhere else as well. And I completely agree with that. And listen, before we run out of time, I think Charlotte wants to know whether or not you know any contacts in Portugal that can help her find a role as well. So she's quite attached to the idea of staying in the sun, I think. So.
I quite like that.
And also, can you ask them where the best bars are?
Oh yeah, I can do that for sure.
Ask her contacts that.
It's my holiday network, to be honest. Yeah.
That's what I found in the past as well. It's a great way. You find all the best bars and restaurants as well.
Yeah, but see, and without going into detail about this, but when it comes to trust, it's not just business trust. It's trust as an individual.
Yes.
So like those nights out actually make a difference, and it's a good investment.
100%.
So.
Well, that's great. We're just coming up on the top of the hour here. It has been an absolutely fascinating 60 minutes. Thank you very much, Sarah, for joining us.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure. A whole wealth of information, I think, there. Going to be difficult to top as a special guest that we've had on. But anyway, that is it for this week. Any final words from anyone before we say farewell?
You're a superstar, Sarah. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.
I honestly thought Simon was going to come on with something else there. Anyway, until next week, we'll be back same time, same place, and we look forward to you joining us then. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
See you all.